Hello! We are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are tackling the single biggest wall standing between you and fluency, the fear of speaking. My name is Anna, and I am here to guide you through the psychological shifts and practical habits that will help you break down that wall using clear, easy English.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. It doesn't matter how many vocabulary words you know if your throat closes up and your mind goes blank the moment you have to talk to someone. Today, we want to share the secrets of overcoming language anxiety so you can step into your next conversation with a calm mind and a confident voice.
That is a perfect way to open this conversation, Abel, and I want to start by saying something very important to every person listening right now. If you have ever felt your heart race before speaking English, if you have ever opened your mouth and suddenly forgotten every word you knew, if you have ever practiced a sentence perfectly in your head and then heard something completely different come out when you actually spoke it, you are not broken. You are not bad at languages. You are human, and what you experienced has a name. It is called language anxiety, and it is one of the most well-studied phenomena in all of education psychology.
I really needed to hear that, Anna, because for a long time I thought I was the only one. I remember a specific moment very clearly. I was at a coffee shop and I wanted to order a simple drink. I had practiced the words in my head about 10 times on the bus ride over. I walked up to the counter, the barista smiled at me, and the moment she said, "Hi, what can I get for you today?" my mind just went completely blank. I stared at her. I felt my face get hot. My heart was beating so fast. I eventually pointed to the menu and said, "That one." I felt so embarrassed walking away.
That story is so real, Abel, and I am certain that so many people listening right now are nodding their heads. What happened to you in that coffee shop is not a failure of intelligence or effort. It is actually a biological event. Let me explain what I mean by that. When we feel social pressure, especially in a second language, our brain can activate something called the fight or flight response. This is a very ancient system in the human brain. Thousands of years ago, when our ancestors were living in the wild, this system helped them survive. If they saw a dangerous animal, their brain would immediately flood their body with a chemical called adrenaline. Adrenaline makes your heart beat faster, it makes your muscles tense up, it narrows your focus, and it shuts down the parts of your brain that are not needed for immediate survival. The problem is that this same ancient system still activates today, not just for real physical dangers, but also for social situations that feel threatening. Standing in front of a native speaker and trying to form a sentence in English can feel like a threat to your brain, especially if you are afraid of being judged or embarrassed. And when that adrenaline floods your system, the language center of your brain, which is the part you actually need to speak well, gets less blood, less oxygen, and less energy. So literally, biologically, your ability to access words decreases in that moment.
That is incredible. So when my mind went blank at the coffee shop, my brain was actually trying to protect me?
Exactly. Your brain was treating that social interaction like a small emergency. It was trying to protect you from the perceived danger of embarrassment or judgment. And this is why we call it a biological hijack. Your rational thinking mind gets temporarily overridden by this older, protective system. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your brain is working exactly the way it was designed to work. The key is learning how to signal to your brain that you are safe. And that's something we're going to talk about in detail today.
So let's talk about that. How do we tell our brain that it is safe to speak?
One of the first and most powerful ways is to change what you believe a successful conversation looks like. And this brings us to what I call the perfectionism trap. Many language learners, especially those who are at an intermediate level, have a very specific picture in their minds of what it means to speak English correctly. They believe that every sentence must have perfect grammar, perfect pronunciation, and a perfect vocabulary choice. And because they're holding themselves to this impossible standard, even before they open their mouth, they've already decided that they will probably fail. That anticipation of failure is itself a trigger for anxiety. It activates the fight or flight system even before the conversation begins.
I know exactly what you're describing. I used to spend so much time correcting my sentences in my head before I said them that by the time I was ready to speak, the conversation had already moved on. Or I would just stay quiet because I wasn't sure if my sentence was grammatically correct.
Yes, and that's a very common pattern. The perfectionism trap is dangerous because it prioritizes accuracy over communication. But here's the truth that every language teacher knows deeply. The goal of language is not to be perfect. The goal of language is to be understood. Think about it this way. If you're at a train station and you need to find the right platform, and you say to a stranger, "Excuse me, where is the train to London?" with a non-native accent and perhaps a small grammatical error, will that person understand you? Almost certainly yes. Will they help you? Almost certainly yes. Did your small imperfection cause a problem? No, it did not. The communication was successful. That's a win. That's fluency in action.
That actually shifts something in my thinking. I always thought fluency meant speaking like a native speaker, but you're saying fluency is more about getting your message across clearly.
Precisely. And when you make that shift in your mind, something remarkable happens. The pressure you place on yourself begins to decrease. And when the pressure decreases, the anxiety decreases along with it. And when the anxiety decreases, the biological hijack is less likely to happen. So the mental shift itself, the simple act of deciding that communication matters more than perfection, is actually a physiological change. It physically reduces the amount of stress your body experiences. Now, this doesn't mean you stop caring about grammar. Grammar still matters and you will improve over time with practice. But during a live conversation, your job is to communicate, not to pass a grammar exam. Give yourself permission to be imperfect, and you will paradoxically become a much more effective speaker.
Anna, I want to bring up something that has stopped me from speaking so many times, and I'm curious if there's a name for it. It's this feeling that everyone around me is watching me, listening to every word I say, and judging my accent. Like when I'm in a group setting and I try to say something, I feel like all eyes are on me and everyone is silently critiquing my accent. Is that a real psychological thing?
It's absolutely a real psychological thing, and it has a fascinating name. It's called the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is a cognitive bias, which it's a regular error that the human brain makes. It's the tendency to overestimate how much other people are noticing us. We feel as though there is a spotlight shining directly on us, highlighting everything we do or say. But here's what psychology research consistently shows. Other people are not paying nearly as much attention to us as we believe they are. Why? Because every single person in that room is dealing with their own spotlight. Every person around you is also thinking about what they're going to say next, worrying about how they look, wondering if they said something strange a moment ago. They're all inside their own minds, focused on their own experience.
So when I'm in a group conversation and worry that everyone heard my grammatical mistake, the reality is that most people probably didn't even notice.
That is exactly right. And even if they did notice a small mistake, research shows they forget it almost immediately because they return their focus to their own thoughts and concerns. The spotlight effect is one of the most liberating concepts I teach to language learners because once you truly internalize it, once you really believe that other people are not analyzing your accent as carefully as you think they are, it removes an enormous amount of social pressure. You stop performing for an imaginary critical audience, and you start simply communicating with real people. That shift is transformational.
I want to talk about practice now, because I know that exposure is important, but a lot of learners, including myself for a long time, feel too scared to practice with real people until their English is good enough. It feels like a trap. You need practice to get better, but you're too scared to practice.
That is one of the central challenges of language learning, and you described it perfectly. It's a cycle of avoidance. You avoid speaking because you are afraid, and because you avoid speaking, you never build the confidence that only comes from speaking. So the question is, how do you break into this cycle? And the answer is to start practicing in a space that has zero social stakes. I call it the safe practice sandbox.
Yes, and I actually have a story about this that I think a lot of listeners will relate to. When I started doing this, I felt a little strange, but I began practicing out loud at home, not just reading silently, but actually speaking the words, forming them with my mouth and tongue, hearing my own voice. I would narrate what I was doing during the day, like I would say out loud, "Now I am making coffee. I am going to put 2 spoons of sugar. The coffee smells very good this morning." Just simple things like that.
That is an excellent technique, and there's a real scientific reason why it works. When you speak a language, you are not only using your brain, you're also training your mouth, your tongue, your lips, and your vocal cords to produce specific sounds in specific sequences. This is called muscle memory. Just like a musician practices scales until their fingers move automatically, a language learner needs to practice speaking until the physical act of forming words becomes more natural and automatic. When you narrate your day out loud at home, you are building that physical muscle memory in a completely safe environment. There's no judgment, there's no audience, there's no pressure. You are simply training your speaking muscles.
And I also started doing something that my friends thought was funny. I would practice ordering food even when I was not at a restaurant. Like I would stand in my kitchen and pretend to order a meal. I would say, "Hello, I would like to order the grilled chicken sandwich, please. Can I have that with extra sauce? And could I also get a glass of water?" Just practicing those phrases out loud over and over in my empty kitchen.
That is such a smart approach. What you are doing is called low-stakes rehearsal. By removing the real social pressure but keeping the realistic language and context, you are training both your brain and your body to associate those phrases with a sense of calm and familiarity, so that the next time you actually walked into a real restaurant and needed to order, your brain already had a familiar pathway for those words. They were no longer completely new and frightening. They were practiced and recognized.
And some learners also find it very helpful to speak to their pets, or even to talk to plants or stuffed animals at home. It sounds playful, but the brain does not fully distinguish between an imaginary audience and a real one when it comes to building verbal fluency. The speaking practice itself is what creates the growth.
Okay, Anna, let's say someone has practiced at home, they feel a little more ready, and they are now in a real conversation with a native speaker. But then they feel that rising panic. Their heart starts to speed up. What can they do in that exact moment to stay calm and keep speaking? This is where I want to teach everyone a technique that I call the 5-second breathing anchor. It's simple, it's practical, and it's grounded in neuroscience. When your fight or flight response activates, your natural breathing becomes shorter and faster. This shallow breathing actually makes the anxiety worse because it sends a signal to your brain that there's danger. But when you consciously slow your breathing down, you send the opposite signal. You tell your nervous system that you are safe. Here's how to do it. The moment you feel the panic rising, before you respond to whatever was just said to you, take one slow, quiet breath in through your nose for about 4 seconds. Then breathe out slowly through your mouth for about 6 seconds. That's it. Just one intentional breath. This simple action increases the oxygen flow to your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain responsible for language, logic, and calm thinking. It literally reoxygenates the language center of your brain and partially reverses the biological hijack we talked about earlier.
Does it feel awkward to pause before responding? Like, will the other person notice?
This is something almost every learner worries about, and here is the truth. A natural pause before speaking feels much shorter to the listener than it does to you. What feels like an uncomfortably long 5 seconds to you often feels like a very normal, thoughtful 1 or 2 seconds to the other person. Native speakers also pause before they respond to things. It is a natural part of human conversation. In fact, taking a moment before you speak often makes you appear more thoughtful and confident, not less. So do not be afraid of the pause. Use it intentionally. It is your biological reset button.
I love that. A biological reset button. That image really helps. Now I want to bring up something that changed my experience dramatically when I first started applying it. It is about being honest with the person you were talking to, about admitting that you are still learning.
Yes, tell us about that, Abel, because this is such an important concept.
For a long time, I tried to hide the fact that I was not a native English speaker, which sounds strange now because obviously my accent makes it clear anyway. But I would avoid saying things that I was not sure about. I would try to sound more fluent than I was, and I was carrying this huge, invisible weight of trying to meet a standard I had not yet reached. And then one day, I just decided to try something different. I was in a meeting at work, and before I started speaking, I simply said, I just want to mention that English is not my first language, so please feel free to ask me to repeat myself if I am not clear. And the reaction was remarkable. People nodded warmly. Someone smiled and said, of course, no problem at all. The entire energy in the room changed. I felt the tension leave my shoulders.
What you discovered intuitively is something that communication researchers call validation disclosure. When you openly acknowledge your situation to the other person, you do two very powerful things simultaneously. First, you remove the hidden pressure of trying to appear more fluent than you are. That pretense is exhausting, and releasing it frees enormous amounts of mental energy that you can redirect toward actually communicating. Second, you activate something very beautiful in the other person, which is empathy. Most people genuinely admire someone who is speaking in a language that is not their native tongue. When you say, I am still learning, please bear with me, you are not showing weakness. You're showing courage and honesty, and most people respond to that with warmth and patience. You instantly transform their expectation from perfection to support.
It really does feel like removing armor, like I had been wearing heavy armor to protect myself from judgment, and when I took it off, I could move so much more freely.
That is a beautiful way to describe it. And I want to add one more thing about this. When you disclose that you are learning, you also give the other person permission to be a better communicator. They will naturally slow down a little. They will choose clearer words. They will check with you to make sure you understood. You actually improve the quality of the entire conversation by being honest. So, validation disclosure is not a disadvantage. It's a communication strategy.
Anna, I want to talk about progress now, because sometimes I practice and practice, and I feel like I am not getting anywhere. And then I have one good conversation, and I feel amazing. But then the next day, I'm scared again. How do I build momentum that actually lasts?
This is such an important question, and the answer involves understanding how the brain builds confidence. Confidence is not something you find all at once. It's something you build one small interaction at a time. And the way you build it sustainably is through what I call the compounding wins tracker. Think about the way interest compounds in a bank account. You don't need to deposit a large amount all at once. You deposit small amounts regularly, and over time, those small amounts grow into something significant. Confidence works in exactly the same way. Every single successful English interaction, no matter how small, deposits a small amount of confidence into your account.
What do you mean by a successful interaction? Because I feel like only the big conversations count.
That's the misconception we need to gently correct. Every interaction counts. Saying good morning to a neighbor in English, saying thank you so much to a cashier, asking someone for directions, reading a sign out loud, responding to a colleague's email. Every single one of these is a successful spoken or written interaction in English. Each one proves to your brain that you can do this. Each one adds evidence to the growing story that you are a capable English speaker. And your brain, which is a pattern recognition machine, begins to recognize that pattern. It begins to build what psychologists call self-efficacy, which is the specific belief that you personally are capable of performing a particular task.
So if I start tracking even my small wins, I'm actually building a real psychological foundation?
Exactly. And I encourage learners to do this literally. Keep a small notebook or a note on your phone. At the end of each day, write down one English interaction that went well. It does not have to be a long conversation. It could be something as simple as, today I understood a joke that a native speaker told, and I laughed at the right moment. That counts enormously. because what you are building is evidence, real personal evidence that you can do this. And on the days when fear comes back, and it will come back sometimes because fear is not something you defeat once and never face again, you have that written record. You can look at it and remind yourself with proof that you have done this before and you can do it again.
Anna, I want to go back to something you said about fear coming back, because I think some listeners might feel discouraged by that. Like, will I always be afraid?
No, you will not always feel the same level of fear that you feel right now. The fear diminishes with consistent practice and accumulated experience, but it is honest to say that new speaking situations will sometimes feel nerve-wracking, even for experienced speakers. The difference is that over time, you develop a relationship with that feeling. You learn to recognize it not as a stop sign, but as a signal that you are growing. Every time you feel nervous about an English conversation and you have it anyway, you prove to yourself that you are stronger than the fear. And that proof is the exact definition of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to speak even when your voice is shaking.
That is so powerful, and it's something I wish someone had told me much earlier. I spent so much time waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident before I would try to speak. But confidence was never going to come from waiting, it could only come from doing.
You have just described one of the most important truths in all of language learning. Courage must come before confidence, not the other way around. Confidence is the reward for courage, not the starting point. So many learners wait for the fear to go away before they begin to practice speaking, but the fear only goes away through the practice itself. You have to be willing to take the imperfect, slightly scary step first, and then the confidence grows from the other side of that step.
I feel like everything we have talked about today connects into one coherent picture. We start by understanding that the fear is biological and not a personal failure. We let go of perfectionism and focus on communication instead. We recognize that the spotlight effect is an illusion and that people are not judging us as harshly as we think. We build muscle memory and comfort through safe, low-stakes practice at home. We use the 5-second breathing anchor to calm ourselves in the middle of real conversations. We use validation disclosure to earn the empathy and patience of the people we speak with. And we track our small wins to build the kind of self-belief that keeps growing over time.
You have captured it beautifully, Abel. And I want to say one final thing to every person who is listening to us right now. Every sentence you have spoken in English today, whether in your head, out loud, to a friend, to a stranger, or simply repeating words along with this podcast, has been a victory. Learning a language as an adult, building the courage to speak it in front of others, pushing through the discomfort of feeling imperfect, these are not small things. These are acts of real, sustained bravery. And every single spoken sentence is a brick in the wall of the fluent, confident communicator you are actively becoming.
And from my own experience, I can tell you that the version of me who was pointing at a menu in a coffee shop because I could not speak a single word did not disappear overnight. But he did disappear, step by step, conversation by conversation, because I chose to keep showing up and keep trying, even when I was afraid, even when I made mistakes, and even when the words did not come out the way I wanted them to.